So let's talk about your experience with 12. It's a pretty unique model for a publishing house. Your agent told you you had died and gone to publishing heaven when you landed with them. So how did that experience work for you?
Well, it was great. I mean, she actually said that late in the process when we were very close to publication, because she was just amazed at how it was going. And there's really, I mean, the two big pieces of 12, the two big personalities are Jonathan Karp, the editor, publisher, and then Carrie Goldstein, the publicist. And they're both great at what they do, and they have really different personalities. And you can see, I can see in emails where sometimes they would hand off things and defer to each other, like, you know, sort of playing to their each strengths. And they both really understand audiences. And but Carrie also really knows how to get somebody booked. You know what people need. You know before Oprah booked us and that didn't play it. You know, he was working like with Nightline and all sorts of different, you know, the Today Show in different places who were interested and like talking to me about, you know, what they needed. And he can really sense when it's not clicking from them, like what they feel is lacking. And sometimes he'd be like, you know, let me know. It would really help if you could come up with like 5 bullet points of, you know, what your book reveals or what's new or, you know, whatever. He could sense if they were lukewarm. I think, you know, if they were lukewarm to one of his pitches, know what they needed, come back to the author to get it, go back to it and make the sale. I think he gets a lot of people booked that maybe other publicists don't because they don't know how to read their own audience well and know what's not working. So, I mean, behind the scenes, he's just great. And he's that way. And then, you know, John is really good big picture, just sort of knowing what stuff, what kind of media will connect. And I talked to some of the book salespeople, too, about just of how to pitch the book. And, you know, obviously, I'd written the book, and during the writing and editing process, he had nothing about, like, you know, the commercial aspects. It was just about making the book work, and we never, you know, talked about how it would sell or anything. No, we didn't. Yeah. We made the best book we can, but then he said, okay, now my job is figuring out how to, you know, pitch this to the public, how to get booksellers, the flap copy, and just like how, and to the media, like, you know, what's the story, why America should care about this story.
And how are you involved in that process?
Not so much. A little bit. They would check in with me, and well, sometimes actually with him too, it would be very occasionally. He would say, you know, it'd be great if you could write like 2 paragraphs of just sort of you know, explaining, you know, what your book is doing, or explaining why this aspect is useful, or, you know, summarizing the killers, and like, so he would come to me for like bits of like fleshing out what he needed to tell the story to people. But he was sort of figuring out and working with the Borders people and the Barnes and Noble people too, of how why they should buy in and make a big order. You know, in Barnes and Noble, well, both of them got really behind it. Barnes and Noble picked it for the Discover Great Writers program, and Barnes and Noble Borders actually made a really big order early on, which makes a difference. You know, I had no idea that all this stuff is how big of a pre-sales they make. All that stuff is really deciding how big of a book you're going to do. In fact, when John had something really important to convey to me, I usually know because he sends me an email with a subject line, important message, or something like that. He puts important in the subject line. Only like once or twice a year.
He doesn't use it.
Yeah, no, he doesn't overuse it. When it's important, he sends me a message saying it's important. And he also, he sat down, we'd sit down with me on the phone just a handful of times to have a really long, not really long, but really intense talk. And he called me in like December, so about 4 months before my book came out. I guess he called me right when we had the advanced readers copies.
Okay.
And he said, I remember very clearly what he told me that day. He said, on publication day of your book, there will be nothing we can do to make it a hit. And there'll be nothing you can do to make it a hit.
It's too late.
It's too late.
Yeah.
He said, everything which determines whether or not this book will be a hit will happen in the next 3 to 4 months, particularly between the months of January and February. The book came out like around the 1st of April. And then March, you know, TV people and magazines, they're already getting their stuff together. They need that time.
Right.
Really, you've got to hit it before that. And I had no idea. And that really put, you know... a
little stress on you?
Well, it just lit a fire under me.
Sure.
Yeah, and so I knew what I was doing. You know, that's the other thing that's good about John. He lets you know, of like, you know, what the rules are, how the game is going to be played. I'm completely new to this. And like, hey, anybody you think should, you know, get this book into their hands, do it now. He also, one of the other things he told me at that point was really important is like, the most important thing I could do is get people to read the book. And he was going the same way. Like, you know, he sent out his list of ARCs. He had like 200 people, and it listed like Charlie Rose, Ted Koppel. I mean, the editors-in-chief of, you know, Time, Newsweek.
He's a little group of readers.
Yes, like all people he personally knows. So, I mean, he had the contact list, but he was treating it the same way. It's like, it's not about getting your book in the hands and getting people who will do favors for you. Like, favors can only take you so far. Right. He said, you need to get people to read the book. Genuine. He believed in the book. He loved the book. He said, if people read the book, they will love it. Then they will go out, move heaven and earth to get you on their show or to get you on somebody's show or get you in their magazine. Right. But they need to read it. You know, you got to get them to actually do it. Get them to read a chapter or something. Mm-hmm. You know, it's not about handing out the book. It's making somebody pick it up and open it.
Yeah, it's a little more proactive.
Yeah, it is. And that helped to know. But what else? You know, I want to tell you about, as an editor too, he sent me an editorial letter. It was 5 or 10 pages. It was just so vivid. And I read it and I remember thinking, wow. It was sort of eye-opening of things that, I felt pretty late in the editing process because I'd already cut 200 pages with my agent, Betsy. And was working on more. And he really put some things into perspective. And he emailed me saying, you know, I'd like to call you and talk to you on the phone about the letter too, as soon as possible, to make sure, you know, you understand it all clearly. And I remember thinking, this is just like, I mean, this is completely blunt. Like, who could not understand this? Like,
right.
But I also thought, at that point, I'd only had a couple fairly brief conversations with him, and I thought, you know, I'm not going to turn down a conversation with Jonathan Karp. And you know, he's a brilliant guy. Like, you know, I will take any opportunity to learn from him and hear from him. So I'm like, great, you know. Yeah. And also, he just bought the book late in the process. He'd rescued it. Mm. And so, you know, I needed to bond with him. So I'm like, okay, I'll call him, thinking like this is a wasted call, but whatever. We probably talked 45 minutes. Mm. I understood it so much better after I did talk to him. Right. Like,
so
yeah,
got lost in the translation on the page.
He'd been very clear in the page, but man, I mean, it was just like he saw it. He saw it like a reader of like, you know, here's where the story is dragging a little bit. You know, here's where you're losing us. Here's where I'm starting to skim. And I was like, skim. You know, it's just, you know, the worst thing to hear.
You bought the book and you're skimming.
Yes. It's brilliant in places.
Why am I happy about hearing this?
Yeah, and like then places could use a little tightening. You know. Yeah, and that definitely caught my ear. Like, if you're skimming, like, you know, the freaking reader will too. Like, you know, I don't want that.
Well, you described him as a surrogate reader.
Yeah. I think he's brilliant at knowing, and that's why. Well, Ezra Pound, the quote is something like, "Write for the smartest person you know." Right. And I heard that in grad school. I was like, wow, I like that. And John is like reads for like the smart everyman. It's like getting how a wider audience is going to respond, but the bright people in the audience who are going to be reading books and who you want reading your books. But yeah, he sort of gets how they're going to respond to different things and just what's sort of sluggish, like the stuff about the lawsuits. Like, I want to know how they turn out. Like, I don't want to go to court on these things and hear, you know, it's just boring. Get to it. You know, the stuff he loved. Also, I knew that I had way too much of the killer's journals in there. And I need to keep cutting it back. And I cut back a whole bunch with Betsy. And
it's got to be tough, though, because that's kind of the vicarious...
That's
the real attractive part, right? Because you're reading the, you know...
And there's so
the
many...
actual stuff.
Yeah.
You know, better word for it than that.
Well, yeah, and there's so much of it. I mean, the journals are just in completely different ways. Erickson Dillard's journals are so vivid, and there's so many intense places, and I just wanted them all. Well, here's another thing where John used the example of Laura Hillenbrand from Seabiscuit, and said that he'd never seen a writer so aware of what she was trying to do early on in her process, and with each of the horse races. Now, I still intend to read the book. I still haven't. But apparently, he said each of the horse races, something significant happens to either the rider or the horse or both, but something changes and something significant develops. And each one, and
stair steps you to the final.
yeah, and each one's completely different. And I can't remember whether there's 4 or 5 major horse races, or however many there are. That's how many there need to be. And there's no horse race that's just an exciting race.
Right.
And, he's like, one more horse race would have just been a waste. And he's like, the journal's the same way. Each time you quote a passage from the journals, it better reveal something new about that killer. Otherwise, if it's reinforcing something we already know, that's a rerun. That's, we already got it. We don't have to hear it twice. And to me, that's tight writing. That's a tight book where every time you're getting something new, and you're assuming your reader is smart and will get it, and you go on.